Welcome, everyone. This is Nathan Parr, and I'm happy to be with you on this presentation today, Remodel or Build New, Accessibility in Your Plan. Thank you to Gene and all the folks at CFX who have invited us to be part of this series and dropping this information. I'm glad that they reached out, and I'm so glad to be with you today, especially in December. I know everybody's gearing up for holidays, so I appreciate your time today. So my name is Nathan Parr. I'm a Facility Stewardship Specialist with Smart Church Solutions. And what I'm going over today, I want to preface it with the legal stuff, right? Main thing is, this is all information that is publicly available. I give you lots of reference websites that I've used that reference it. It is about things like ADA and accessibility. So I encourage you to do your own research, talk to your local authority having jurisdiction over your area, because each state is different. We've done this work. Me personally, I've done work like this and evaluations in 26 different states so far, about 7 million square feet. What I'm pointing out to you is just some basic accessibility things that I believe every church should look for, mainly because it's the right thing to do, but also a lot of what the people that are coming to our venues, that come to our facilities, this is the expectation because they're out in public areas, public buildings or governmental buildings, and this is the standard. When we have certain standards for how parking lots are designed, certain standards for accessible routes, curb ramping, elevators, being able to get from point A to point B, that is commonplace. So that is the expectation. First-time guests and visitors are coming when they come into your facility. So the closer we get to that, the better. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it and see what we can discover together, okay? So what does the law say, and does it really matter? So as a matter of fact, yes, churches are exempt from the ADA, which is the American with Disabilities Act. So we'll commonly refer to it throughout this session and this presentation as ADA. But yes, we are exempt from ADA, and I actually had a phone call, called their helpline when I first started as an operations manager at a large church here in Texas to ask that specific question, because I came from a commercial construction background where I did a lot of ADA compliance work. So I was actually used to bringing up facilities to compliance. And I guess I should pause right here and say a little bit about me. So in addition to being a facility stewardship specialist for the last 7 years, almost 7 years, with Smart Church Solutions, for 12 and a half years, I was an operations director at a large church here in Texas. Prior to that, I owned my own construction company. I did commercial and residential new and retrofit construction. I've done commercial landscaping, commercial roofing. I was active duty Marine Corps. I served and I deployed overseas. I've done commercial, just about anything in the commercial field, from site prep on up to putting on the roofs. I have a degree in social science, a master's in theology, and a master's in business administration. And I have personally evaluated, like I said, I think earlier, almost a little over 7 million square feet of churches and sacred space as part of facility condition assessments in 26 states, from all sorts of facilities, ranging from, I think the earliest I've done was built in the late 1750s to modern facilities. And so I've seen kind of all from historic places on up to modern, and a lot of them share the same issues, and from small, 3,000, 4,000 square foot facilities on up to the 200,000 square foot facilities, and that's just a matter of scale. So all that aside, again, let's jump back into it. So the law. So I actually called, and yes, they told me, yes, churches are exempt. There's a separation there. However, if you've ever built new or you're contemplating building new, know that a state can't require less than the federal requirements for accessibility, but they can require more. So if there's a kind of federal law, then the state can actually say that you are compliant if you're doing new construction. Many times, if you do new construction or any type of significant remodel, where in the percentages of the square footage that is affected during the renovation will be different across jurisdictions. But if it's significant enough, they're going to require you likely to be compliant with whatever the local accessibility rules are when you build new or retrofit. In Texas, it's Texas accessibility standards, and we couldn't get a certificate of occupancy when I was an operations director and we built a new building until that particular part of the building was compliant. I did not have to retrofit the rest of the building, But to get the certificate of occupancy of that new construction, everything had to meet the Texas accessibility standards, the current ones at the time. And so, yes and no. No, technically we're not, but in a lot of ways, if you do construction new or otherwise, you're going to. In addition to that, just because we're exempt, it's probably not good policy to try to ignore and make those statements like, oh, we don't have to be compliant with accessibility or ADA because we're exempt. Okay. In that case, I would always question, and I do question folks, if that's your stance, are you going to be bold enough to add signage saying, welcome to our church, except for those with mobility or other physical issues, you make us nervous. We're not going to make it easy for you to come in. We're not going to accommodate you like the local coffee shop will. We're not going to make the effort like the local bookstore does, or the local tarot reading place. It makes sense. So these businesses, again, this is becoming the expectation. The expectation is businesses are compliant with accessibility things. That's what the public is used to. That's what businesses conform to. And while we're not, what we're doing is not like selling, and we're not in that same arena technically as private business or public government, things like that. When it's the expectation of who we're reaching out to, it says and makes a big statement if we completely ignore that. And it's not just what we think of when we think of ADA. We always think of the worst case, completely dependent on caregivers and wheelchairs, things like that, which it can be obviously, but the accessibility stuff actually benefits anybody with accessibility issues. So myself, being a vet, I think I saw a T-shirt I love the other day. It says, it's not a dad bod, it's a vet bod, which is like a dad bod, but with more knee pain. Any vet out there or anybody who's done military construction, anything where you've done a lot of work, up and down ladders, things like that, you probably have knee pain, even like long distance runners, knee or foot pain. Stairs are not fun. When I evaluate a lot of these facilities, they don't have elevators, they don't have accessible routes. So I'm having to do a lot of stairs, I'm having to climb things. And it's difficult. And sometimes when I visit areas, how far I go into, and this is not when I'm visiting part of my job, but on my own, how far I go into the facility a lot of times can be determined on how accessible it is. If I know I have to do a lot of stairs to go up to see something, I really need to want to see it for me to actually do that, because the pain that develops later can really discourage me from enjoying the rest of my time. And if you have visibility issues, if you've just had surgery, rotator cuff, where you've got a temporary sling, you're not used to it. All of these things can happen, young, old, doesn't matter. And these all impact our ability to easily enter and exit a facility. So when we're compliant with and pay attention to the rules and the recommendations and the standards, it makes it easier for everyone, no matter what is going on, to feel welcomed and to feel like they can enter the facility without having to take some extraordinary effort. So in that regard, I would always offer to you that is a great thing to pursue. It just makes it nicer for everyone. So the three areas that I would like to look at today, and I say I would like to look at, but I mean, I literally put this presentation together, so this is what we're looking at today, right? Parking lots, accessible routes, interior, and restrooms. There's a lot of technical information on all of these, and unless you're like me and likes to read the rules and likes to read the tech manuals and likes to read the design guides, a lot of this can feel daunting, can feel overwhelming. I want to assure you, one, I've given you some great, easy to read resources to check out. Two, if you're doing this, the reality is you will likely work with someone who has the experience to do this, either an engineer or an architect, or even a construction professional who's done a lot of ADA compliance work. They'll know the rules, they'll know the regs, and these are not hidden, and it's not hard to find how wide something should be, what the slope should be, what it means. They have made it very ironically accessible for you to find out the rules. In fact, most of the guides on the websites for ADA or any type of accessibility have additional features on the website that make it those that have trouble reading websites and hearing things to actually access all the stuff. So there's really not an excuse to get educated on the content. It is, again, for lack of a better term, it is fairly accessible for just about anybody. So I just want to encourage you in that and say, hey, take the time. The guides I've given you, it's a start. I've given at the end of the presentation, the last slide, it's got my email address. If you want some more information, ways to point you in the right direction, happy to do it. The guides that I've provided deal with on the national level. And again, because churches are exempt, it's not necessarily going to say churches. But we have performance venues, what would be classified as performance venues. A lot of times our sanctuaries are set up like that. We have parking areas, we have accessible routes, we have restrooms. So all of these areas that we talk about are in that, and we can look at that. Okay. So looking and thinking about parking lots, what about them? Okay. There's at the top above my head, there's a couple different topics strictly from ADA.gov where a lot of these graphics come from. I want to give them credit. They created these resources. I didn't come up with this. I just copied it and put it out here for you because it's available at those the websites. But in parking lots, when we talk about where the parking spaces are, they've got to be in the shortest accessible route to the accessible entrance. That's a big thing. They've got to be close, and we all know that. The closest spaces when we go to shopping are usually the marked accessible spots. Access aisles, that means we need to be able to access them because, again, if we have mobility issues, a lot of times we will have a wheelchair or a walker or a cane or something that necessitates slightly wider access. And with cars today, if we shirk or shrink down the parking space, that can be an issue. Because a lot of times you'll see those that have accessibility issues, especially kids, and especially if there's some sort of mobility aid like a wheelchair or walker. A lot of times you'll have a slightly larger vehicle to be able to carry what you need. And when we talk about accessibility and we talk about openers and things like that in the parking lots, the design guides are geared towards everything that someone needs to do to be able to navigate independently. So if I'm in a wheelchair, it's designed that I can drive up in my vehicle, release my wheelchair from the locks because I've got hand controls, for example, roll back, get into my side lift, van lift, get out of my van, and then navigate into the building all by myself. I don't have to have or I don't need to have a helper. I don't need to have an usher or something like that. Because I hear that a lot. It's like, oh, well, we always have ushers on Sunday. Yeah, but business doesn't always occur on Sunday, and every event doesn't always happen on Sunday. And a lot of times if an usher is engaged or an usher doesn't show up or something like that, your whole plan to be accessible is now no longer valid. So as we look at these design guides and we look at these, it's about someone being able to navigate independently. And if you want to know if your area is independent for the primary case that we think of, grab the wheelchair that's likely in your building. I can't, probably less than 1% of the churches I've evaluated over the last 7 years do not have a wheelchair somewhere, which is great. So grab the wheelchair, open it up, sit down in it, and try to navigate from the accessible spot, if you have one in your parking lot, into your building without help. Can you get there? Can you go to a common gathering area? Can you go to the worship center or sanctuary? Can you go to a Sunday school classroom or a small group meeting room without help? Can you get there? And if you can't, can you go to the restroom? Open the door, walk in, or roll in, I guess roll in. Can you access the restroom and do all the things that you would need to do without assistance? That's one of the easiest ways to determine this. But again, going back to parking lots and parking, I'm not going to read all of that stuff there, but you need to have it. You need to have access. And how many do you have to have? Well, that is here, there on the bottom right of the slide. It tells you if based on your total number of parking spaces, and this is pretty standard, how many accessible parking spaces, car and van, that you have to have. Know that if you only need one, it should be a van accessible parking space. So just know that you're always going to have, if you've got two spaces, you're looking at a typical or a car space and a van space, or two with a shared access aisle. But if you only have one van space, the access aisle is supposed to be on the passenger side. But if you go into those guides, it explains that fully. So you don't have to remember that, and trust me, you don't, and you won't. Over the next couple slides, what I want to do is point out, and I'm going to try to use this handy dandy little pointer thing, or maybe draw some circles on the slide, because it's technology, fun, and point out just some of the common things I see in a lot of these slides. These are from actual facility condition assessments that have been performed over the years. I have just tried to pull random. I opened up about 17 different ones and pulled pictures from each, just to show you just common things that I see. And so it's not a denomination thing. It's not a size of church thing. It's not a location thing. This is just a common thing. And so let's look here. And there we go. And that's an eraser, and that's a pen. All right. So parking lot, a couple things that we have here. Obviously, I'm going to go kind of from left to right, upper to lower. So as we look right here, obviously this is alligatoring, common occurrence we see in our parking lots. Well, this is difficult to walk on, let alone roll on, especially difficult if you've got a walker, if you've got a cane, something like that. This is a drive area, and it's hard to see here, but again, we've got the double line here, so we've got the two routes of traffic, and we've got some additional issues here, but there's a parking area which you can't see out of the slide that they have to walk across. This is an interesting one and a common one, and these two pictures here are combined. As you see here, this is a marked accessible spot, and we've got this here right next to it. And if we look at this deal, one, because this is here, it's actually into what is considered the accessible, the access aisle that we talked about, because this was an accessible spot, and this is. So this ramp actually is in the access aisle, which blocks that. And this ramp, based on its design here, does not meet design standards for an accessible ramp. Now, I applaud the fact that they've done this, and it does not exceed the kind of the 1 in 12, which is kind of a universal type standard to kind of look for initially. But it's incorrect. Someone could roll and go off the side of the ramp, trip and fall. And there's no handrail or anything like that, because if it's got a curb like this, it's supposed to have something denoting that there's a drop-off point there. Like it should have some sort of handrail coming down it here, and there, and all to ADA standards and everything, which is level 12 inches past the grade change, and curve down, and so on and so forth. So that's an issue. We see that a lot. A lot of times we don't see anything, but at least they do have that. Here we've got some directional signage that's difficult to see. This little arrow here, and so if I've got visibility issues, I'm still able to drive, but I've just got some visibility issues. That's a potential concern. Here I've got guest parking, and the reason I'm showing this guest parking here, and you see it there, and it's nice, and it's got some accessible parking as well, is because if I turn around, I'm standing in a drive-through right here when I took this picture, and then there's a drop-off area, and so I'm standing here, I turn around, this is my next picture, so they do have a nice cut here, but that means the walk path is through two drive paths, and there's nothing denoting in the drive area that there's a potential crosswalk here. Now, crosswalks aren't required, it's just a good idea, right? And then in here we have a walk area marked, and this is a ramped area or a zero grade area, but we see this big issue right there. And that's obviously a concern because that is a hole. And so if I'm walking there and I have issues, that's a hole. Now we're going to see, hopefully these won't transfer on the slide, but let's go. Awesome, it doesn't. Okay. So additional things that we're looking at here for parking lots. That's my big old size 14 foot right there. And you'll notice this crack here makes my size 14 look relatively small. So that's an issue, especially someone think with a walker or even high heel. I mean, that's a heel catch. It's a trip hazard. This here is a sign. It's difficult to see, and the spaces themselves aren't marked. It's pointing to this space and maybe this space because this is technically a ramp, but you see the striping is faded and it's very difficult to see. And this place gets snow, so in the snow, we're not sure what we're looking at or where we're going. The width of this one, 87 inches. Again, that's narrower than a normal parking spot, and this was a designated accessible spot. This sign here, again, hard to see. Visitor parking, thank you. And we all know we should. Visitors are people you don't want to come back. Guests are those who you want to come back and stay longer. So if we think about it, let's change that visitor to guest at some point. But again, the striping and the size of the sign is difficult. Going here at the bottom right real quick, obviously this sign, it's all correct in what it says. It's at the right height and everything, but that is what it looks like. That is not faded, or I'm sorry, it is faded, and that's the issue. But it's not reflecting because of the sun or anything. When I took the picture, that's just what it looks like. So again, difficult to see. And here we have, again, accessible parking. We've got the access aisles, which is nice. We don't have signs, but signs aren't always required. It's just sometimes nice. But along that tree line, I probably wouldn't put signs either. But as you notice, there's no building by these signs because the building is across the parking lot that way. So you've got to actually go across the parking lot to get into the building. So again, they go across here. Looking at these two, these are connected here on the bottom left. You'll notice, again, these are nice. This is really close to the building. There's this access point here that goes into the facility there. And so the corner you can't see in this picture here, so that corner here, down here, is actually this corner here. Now, what do you notice at that corner? There's a downspout, and this place, this particular area gets freezing weather and freezing rain, things like that. Well, so this downspout literally dumps across the accessible access point and the accessible route at the accessible parking, and this parking lot is actually angled. The grade kind of flows down that way. So this water, as it shoots out, and the water from this downspout here and the water from this downspout here flow out into the accessible parking, which is kind of a concern when you think of what's going to happen with freezing rain, freezing temperatures, things like that. So when we look at parking lots, when we look at the accessibility, we look at things like that. Those are the things where we need to think of is not what does it take for me, what makes it easy, what fits, but what makes sense from someone who has mobility issues. That naturally flows in. I've mentioned it quite a bit. What about accessible routes? Here's a great guide, again, from accessboard.gov. They've really taken the rules and the issues and made it accessible for you. So I would encourage you to take a look at this particular website. So when we think of accessible routes, curb ramps, protrusions, etc., those are the things that make up and impact the accessible routes that we might have. So you can see like that one curb ramp we talked about, it didn't have this 1 in 10 max cross slope or down slope, side slope rather, for a built-up ramp that it has. Or if you look at here, the running slope and the landing and the minimum and wet conditions, and ramps are not supposed to be able to collect water. Protrusions, handrails that stick out, potentially door signs, and there's all this stuff is governed by clearances and inches, and it's based on, okay, if someone's got a cane and uses it, sight impaired, and uses it to navigate, things can't be in certain areas. Certain things can't have to be above 80 inches or above, or they can't protrude more than this point out of the wall based on the sweep of the cane, and it can get very, very confusing, but it's not impossible to navigate. So we just think about that. So when we think of accessible route, one thing to kind of make it simple is, how can I place someone who has mobility issues close to the primary activities in the building and provide them a pathway, walkway that has the least amount of items in it, right? The simplest. So as we look at accessible route, we'll stay outside for a little bit on some of these pictures. And so again, here's an accessible route issue. I'm gonna look at the bottom left here. All of these accessible parking spaces, again, they're marked, and this whole parking lot is considered accessible. But again, we've got the parking spaces over here, but you have to cross the parking lot to go to the curb ramp that's accessible from this parking lot, which happens to be right here, this upper right. So I probably should have put those better, but you have to cross this whole parking lot to get to this point and then get up to here in there. And as we think of curb ramps, again, we've got some, we don't have a cross slope here, we've got a curb, and that's kind of an issue. So, I mean, and technically they had the room, they could have come at a, wow, that's not a diagonal, but you get the idea. They could have come that and actually cross slope this, done the same thing here. And I point this out a lot on my assessments that I like a contrasting color here. So it's got this texture here, which is great because texture, this does two things. One, it helps keep the water from pooling on the ramp, which is it's supposed to do. And you'll notice that on most public entrances, curb cuts, things like that, it's always going to have some sort of contrasting texture and color because the color helps for those. Again, it's a visual reminder that this slope, or that there's slope here, or that this surface is different than the adjacent surfaces. So it's a good thing. And we see that down here where this is different color and it's got the markings. The issue here is, and I didn't see on here, some of the measurements are off, and there's this landing area is a little off, and the paint's chipped in some areas. But that's just kind of a juxtaposition between this one and that one. So again, this one doesn't have the cross slope. This one does. It's not necessarily required to have the contrasting color, but I would offer that it's always a good idea because it is a great alert that this is different. This surface is different. And when we're thinking about accessible parking, closest, plus if we can have the access points and the accessible route in such a way that when you access it, you do not have to pass, cross, or otherwise be in the flow of traffic. That's what we look for. A lot of times you can find that. You can get that if you're willing to lose some of your parking area or widen the sidewalk or do zero grade from your parking area up into your sidewalk. So there are ways, but that's the first part of the accessible route here. Some additional accessible route issues, again. Now I like that this here has got a little bit of visual indicator of the edge, because if you look here, if I look right here and I look right here and here, it is difficult to tell if that yellow stripe was not there. Can you tell on this picture where those two steps are? No, you can't. That's why it's nice to have that visual indicator of this is a stair edge, this is a stair edge, this is a stair edge. Same thing on worship center platforms, by the way, and steps. But you also have a drop here in the sidewalk, which is over an inch, which is a big deal. Anything over an inch is problematic when it comes to accessible routes. This is a trip hazard. It's a trip hazard right next to a drop-off, a two-step drop. Same thing here. You see my big old foot, and it's more than an inch between these two sections of concrete of the sidewalk here. And then you say, well, Nathan, what's the issue here? This looks pretty good. It does, but if we look at this little outlet here, we'll notice that from this pillar, there's an internal drain system and to the left here is a drop-off, and for obviously, and it's zero from the parking lot up, and it's ramped. So it's ramped appropriately, but you can notice that this concrete is a little more damaged than this concrete. Why? Because this happens to be an area in Texas that gets a lot of rain, and the rain has actually damaged the concrete here because of the flow. But that also means if it ever freezes, we've now made a slip and slide there. Even in the rain, a heavy enough rain, it's a slip and slide, and that's the accessible route. So we need to think about drainage. We need to think about those things in addition. You might ask, why do I have this door here? It's an automatic door. What's wrong with that? Nothing's wrong with that. I love automatic doors. Automatic doors are a main component and a primary missing component, by the way, in accessible routes. You can have everything right, but if you do not have any type of automatic door opener, then you don't have an accessible route, again, because the intent is to make it so that someone can access the facility on their own. And without an automatic door opener, you can't do that. The other issue that I find a lot of is they'll lock the door, they'll have a key switch on the automatic door opener, which means it doesn't work. And that's great from the outside. You don't want to have people have access to your building all the time. It is not good from an egress standpoint. So then we get into a life safety issue. If you've got an automatic door, if the door is locked, dogged down, locked, whatever, it still needs to be able to operate if I hit the push button on the inside. So it needs to retract the lock, or it needs to disengage the strike so that the opener can open the door. So you'll need to invest in an electric strike or an electric latch, something that allows you to then have that 24-volt system actually operate the door. So in the event of an emergency, someone who needs that door to open automatically can actually have it happen. So you can't just have a push bar because that doesn't meet the requirement from life safety. And most common openers have the ability to control a secondary 12 or 24-volt device, which is going to be your electric latch or electric strike. Okay, and it'll do it in series the correct way. So again, continuing accessible route. So again, this is a good example of we've got the edges marked, which needed to happen because that concrete looks similar. And this is what we're looking for when we look for a proper ending. You see it's level past the step, minimum of 12 inches, and it doesn't have a sharp edge. So it extends and it curves down and then it curves back. So it's not a trip hazard, does the same thing up here. The only issue in this picture, besides these are chipped, is there is a depression here, and that's holding water. And so again, we put water there, right there. It's kind of an issue. Another thing I see from an accessible route standpoint, and again, we always like to have one that a wheelchair can do or a walker easily, but it also for those who have a cane or who need assistance when walking. Handrails, not having enough handrails or only having it on one side. If you have a set of steps like this and we only had this handrail and the one on this other side and didn't have this intermediate one or the middle one, then we really limit which and how many people can use it and where they do it. And so it's always good to have at least one on each side. And then if you've got a wider entrance like this, having it out here. This is another picture of the first step is marked, but the rest aren't. And again, visually, you can see it better, but there's an issue. But there's also no handrail here, which means if someone were to stumble or to have a problem, again, there's nothing there to help them. And then same thing here. We have this wall. A lot of you have this. What is this wall? This particular point right here is the end of the balcony. That's where if you flip over that's you go down to the first floor. The carpet, it's not easy, and imagine with the lights down, it's not easy to see the steps. There's no real handrail here. There's no lighting that identifies or addresses that. So when we think accessible route, and we think of the ability to navigate, those are things that we're looking at. In addition, kind of last thing, again, here's another example. This ramp here has the right cross slope. You'll notice that there. You can see the curbing is marked, which is great. We've got this triangle here. We've got the cross slope. We've got the right slope here. It doesn't have any type of texture on it, which means the potential for water to be held in these areas is greater than if it did. And it does not have a contrasting color. But if this had contrasting texture, grind lines in it, apply the surface contrasting color, something, it'd be even better. So it's very, very close. But with the addition of those couple things, it would actually make it better. Here, it's great to see the handrail, but it doesn't extend like it's supposed to. But at least there's one there. But the same thing here. It's difficult from the top of the platform to see the steps. Same thing here on this picture here. Look down these steps. Yes, it's got good handrails. But as you see from this picture, and it's the only reason it's brighter there, the lighting was very dim because I have a flash, but it's hard to see the step edge when you don't have a contrasting color. So again, when we think accessible right, it's visual impairment, it's physical impairment, it's all those things that we look at. And so again, when we're thinking about building new or otherwise, these are the things that we think of, because a lot of this is can be addressed with design choices. A contrasting color on the step edge of the platform here. Ensure your handrails are done correctly, adding the stuff there. New or retrofit, these are design choices that can be made and made easily. So the final primary area I want to talk about in this little webinar is restrooms, because everybody's got them, everybody needs them. There's again guidelines here for toilet rooms. I call them restrooms. They might call them toilet rooms. I was thinking of trying to think of some nifty little pun to use, about the overflowing choices in restrooms or something like that. But I guess I did just give a bad one. But hey, it's December. That's my gift to you is a bad pun. But there are many choices when it comes to toilet rooms, what goes in them, what they need to look like. This is when a design professional is very handy if you're retrofitting a restroom. And the nice thing is you do not have to make every single restroom, every single toilet room, every single room in your facility accessible. Let me be clear on that. You don't have to make everything meet the standard. The goal is to have the closest one to the accessible route be and meet the accessibility requirements. So one, and it could be a unisex or a, and that to me, quite frankly, is one of the easiest solutions, is create a unisex toilet, one that is designed for anyone who needs the extra space and meets all the requirements. That then is large enough that you can also have, for example, sometimes we have special needs adults that need a changing table. If you have a unisex restroom that meets all of the requirements for not only the standard, what we would call ADA issues, but in addition to some of the special needs, like an adult changing table in addition to a child changing table. Excuse me. That's something you can do, and then actually truly make your space accessible and inviting and open to all, regardless of physical presentation. And so that's something to consider. Here's some guides on it. Again, that resource. And again, when we talk about the options, there's just like a couple common things. When we look at the clearances vary. It's not consistent. It's based on how you approach. So if I'm approaching, like in these examples here on the upper left, if I'm approaching straight in, this is what my clearance is. If I'm approaching from the side, this is what my clearance is. If I've got a changing table in there, this is what the clearance is. If I've got the approach here, I need turning space here. If I've got more than one urinal, one of them is supposed to be meet accessible as far as the height and the protrusion from the wall. It varies. And even where you put the fixtures, it's all governed based on the design. And there are so many designs out there. Again, retrofitting a single space, making it unisex, is much simpler many times and more economical and a better steward, and you're a better steward of finances and space by doing that many times than trying to make everything. So, look at that first. Try to make a restroom on every floor in your building, if you have multiple floors, compliant to accessibility. And it's not just for those that we think of, but toilet height. As silly as it sounds, there's a minimum and a max toilet height for an accessible toilet. That makes a difference for tall people or people whose knees don't work. So just little things like that. One of the first things I always check if I see these signs, and this is another thing, don't put this sign here that has this, do not put it on a restroom, toilet room, or anything if it does not truly meet that. Because if I see this, I have a certain set of expectations born out of my experience with governmental and public facilities that has to meet that. If it doesn't meet it, it's very apparent and it's very frustrating. If you've got that sign but you don't have the correct width on your doors or partitions or in the toilet stall, someone in a wheelchair, if that's the case, is not going to be happy. And it's not nice. And by the way, if it is compliant, not only will it have that symbol, but it will have the Braille on it as well. So if it's accessible, that sign, if it's got that symbol on it, it also needs to be in Braille. If it's not, that sign's incorrect for an accessible restroom. But why do I have this picture here? Well, this is a fish scale, and I'm not a fisherman. I don't fish. Is that how I'd say that? I don't fish. But this is the critical line that I'm looking at. Because, whoa, I didn't mean that line, but this little section right here, because that's 5 pounds. This is 5 pounds, okay? That is important because after the initial force required to open a door on an accessible restroom, it cannot take more than 5 pounds to hold the door open. That's just one of those weird archaic rules that I've decided to hold into my head when I do the facility condition assessment, because the reality is, if it exceeds 5 pounds on the hold open force, it is not accessible. Can you adjust the hold open force on a closer? Absolutely you can. And if you're not adjusting your closers, part of your preventative maintenance, get a software that you can plug in as preventative maintenance, because you should be checking them and adjusting them semi-annually or quarterly and doing that, but especially on any restroom that's marked there. And so again, when I mentioned earlier a unisex restroom or a family restroom, if you don't have a lot of space, money, or otherwise, make one that meets everything, and then put that type of sign on it. So the door, how heavy the door feels is important. Here, while technically this does not protrude too far, and it's within the wide range that you're allowed to put this particular dispenser blocks my hands here. I can't get my hand all the way around the grab bar when that's an issue, because there's certain requirements for grab bars. This door cannot open on this picture here because of this device that protrudes from the wall. This door cannot open fully. Because this door cannot open fully, this gap here is not correct. So everything that you add into a restroom, everything can potentially affect it. So again, I can't get my hands around here because of this thing. I can't. I see this a lot. This is okay, I'm going to go a little off script here. This is a personal thing for me. Don't put couches in the restroom. That's nasty. Okay, because you're not cleaning it, you're not sanitizing it, and that's just this. And I get, well, no, I don't, because this is not an appropriate place for breastfeeding. Or for a woman who needs to express, do pumping or anything. I don't want to eat in the restroom, neither should the child. And this is not a hangout place. That's what the foyer's for, or that's what the classroom, the small group room is for. That's what your house is for. It's not the restroom. So no, don't put this in here. 2, this route, because this was a restroom that was marked as accessible, this is part of the accessible route. Remember that turning radius they need? And something, so this is 8-inch tile, and I needed 5 feet, and I don't have 5 feet here. I don't have 60 by 60 inches here. That's an issue. So no on furniture in the restrooms, and because it's nasty, and 2, it impacts our accessible route into the restroom. So we need to think ahead of that. And again, nobody wants to have tea time in the toilet. They shouldn't. So I digress. I apologize. So it seems like I just skipped a whole bunch of things. But I didn't. Okay. So that is, sorry, I didn't mean to quite just end abruptly on the don't have couches in the restroom. But those are just primary areas, and we're coming up close to an hour here. Those are 3 areas that I would just like to put in your brain housing group, as we used to call it in the Marine Corps, just to think about. When you think about building new, when you think about renovations, retrofitting, any of those things, a lot of that is just awareness. A, that you should be aware of it, and B, a lot of it can be addressed by simple design choices, texture choices, and just being intentional to say, okay, I need one. And so meeting the minimum is always great. It's great if you can do more, but at the very least, if you can say, okay, I need at least 2 spaces, and from there I need to have this access route. and I'm going to have it closest to the primary door for worship. And I'm going to make sure that door has an opener. I'm going to make sure the restroom that's closest to the worship center, I have at least one that is fully accessible. And then I'm going to make sure when I go into my restroom that they can easily come in and set up, whether they have a wheelchair, whether they have a walker or cane. There you go. Being consistent with that, being intentional with that. Whether it's new construction, and new construction is likely going to require it, or major renovation is likely going to require it. But as you think and as you address deferred maintenance, as you think of being a welcoming environment, as you think of handling the business of your organization, of your facility, keep that in mind. It's not just what we think of, someone who's in a wheelchair. It can be the guy like me who's walking around and assessing who has bad knees. It could be the person who just had surgery. It can be the young family who has a special needs child that has a walker that has never felt welcome because their child can't do things and has no way to get in and out of areas because nobody's made that effort because they're, quote, exempt. But that doesn't mean we're exempt from seeing everybody and caring for them and doing the best we can to accommodate the physical demands and the physical needs within the communities we serve and with those that access our facilities. Let's do what we can. Let's do our part to limit those physical detractions that the facility can have to keep people from hearing the word, from being ministered to, and being properly impacted by your ministry. So let's do our part. That's my recommendation. So I thank you for the time. I thank you again, Gene, and those at CFX. I love what you do, how you reach out and you educate. Thank you for that. Again, I can be reached if you have any further questions, Nathan@smartchurchsolutions.com. We've got a website. We've got a Facebook group, Church Facility Management Solutions. It's free and private, where folks like you ask questions and get them answered all the time. I'd love to see you there as well. So thank you again, CFX. Thank you, Gene. This has been Remodel, Build New, Accessibility in Your Plan. Once again, my name is Nathan Parr, Facility Stewardship Specialist for Smart Church Solutions. Thank you, and I pray you have a blessed rest of your day, and we'll see you around.